Welcome. I'm Frederick, and I will be interviewing individuals for Kenosha Voices, an oral history project of the Kenosha County Historical Society in conjunction with Kenosha Community Media. I have worked in newspapers for more than 40 years as an editor and a reporter. 38 and a half of those years were at the Kenosha News. I am also a member of the Kenosha County Historical Society Board. We hope you enjoy these programs. I'm speaking with Ronald Frederick, former employee of the American Brass Company and former president of the union there. Thank you for speaking with me today.
That'd be my pleasure.
When did you start working at the American Brass?
I started in 1950, and I was 18 years old, and it was, back then you couldn't go to work until you were 18, so I went in and started on October 9th, 1932.
Okay, you started there.
Made $1.35 an hour, okay. And then in 60 days you got a 4-cent raise.
Oh, okay. So you started there in the fall right after you graduated from high school.
High school, yeah.
In Kenosha.
Well, actually, I didn't graduate from high school. I did that later.
Okay. So you started there at $1.35 an hour in the shipping department, and after 60 days, you said you got a 4-cent raise.
Got a 4-cent raise.
Okay, so you were making $1.39 an hour.
Yep.
Okay, and how did you get to work then?
I walked. Everybody walked. All the factories in town here were all close. McQuite and Gladish and the rest of them. So I'm sure some people had a car, but I just didn't have I couldn't afford a car yet.
Okay. So you started in the shipping department?
Yes, I did.
And how long did you work in that department?
I worked in the copper tube mill. Now, the brass had 6 different things. They had the sheet brass, the sheet copper, the rod mill, the casting shop, and of course the shipping departments. But I worked there from 1952 to 1950 to 1952. Okay. In 1952, I went in the service in the Air Force and served for 4 years. Then after that, I went back and got my old job back in the shipping room.
Okay. And what did you do in the shipping room?
Yeah, packing tubes. It was a copper tube mill, and we did made copper billets were. What they did is they rolled them out hollow so they could draw them down into different sizes. Packing copper tube.
But it was coils that were packed, or did
They're
you
coils, long 20-foot tubes. Different sizes. It was non-ferrous, obviously non-ferrous metal. All the stuff that products at the brass were non-ferrous products. So you could non-ferrous you can draw it or turn it down and so.
And do a lot of things with it.
Yeah.
Okay, so how long did you work in the shipping department when you returned from the service?
Well, I worked there I worked actually 32 years at the brass from 1950 until 1982, although the 4 years I was in the service, although that counted as
seniority?
As seniority, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you moved out of the shipping department when?
Probably about 3 years later. I start running a crane.
Oh, did you need
overhead crane?
Okay. Did you get any training for that?
Oh, sure. They trained you. Yeah, okay. They trained you.
How about safety equipment?
Well, it got better. It got better, but people got hurt. The machines they were dangerous walking through the machines, but they didn't have any railings, and one guy got killed because he walked across in front of a machine coming back and hit him and killed him. So.
Okay. So were you wearing helmets or
goggles? No helmets, no hearing aids, no earplugs. That came a little bit later,
Okay. So when you were a crane operator, how long did you do that?
Probably 6-7 years.
Okay.
7 years.
And what was that job like? What did you do?
Well, you had to they strapped the metal, and of course some of it was 120 feet long, so it took 2 cranes. So sometimes 2 crane operators. You had a big boom on your crane, and it was 2 cables going down, and then you'd lift it and bring it to where they wanted to cut the next product, whatever.
Okay, what was a typical day like? What was a typical day at work like?
Typical day, I don't know, long, I guess, 8 hours. You got your breaks. They had operators got breaks because you had to be on job all the time. You couldn't leave to go to the bathroom until somebody relieved you, in the crane. So they had a relief operator that came around and relieved all the employees.
So you stayed
the
up
crane
in
operators.
there was a replacement if somebody had to come off the crane.
Somebody had to come. Somebody went from crane to crane and relieved a 15-minute break, and then you got a 15-minute break.
Okay. Okay. What did the company make? I know you mentioned they made copper tubes. They coiled.
Well, they made copper tubes. That would be the copper tube and alloy tube. There's different alloys. I mean, copper comes there's different alloys. There's 103. There's all different numbers for different alloys, but it all had to be annealed in a annealing furnace and softened for the next time you drew it down to a lower size.
So the ultimate or finished product was always tubing when you were done?
Well, no. They had tubing or. Yeah, tubing, right? Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
so ultimately the
Yeah.
sheets and whatever.
In the copper tube mill.
That's what
Some departments like the sheet across the street from where I worked. They had drawn copper, and they rolled it out. They drew a solid copper stuff. They drew that out. So.
Okay. And what was the tubing used for?
Well, if your house if you have water coming to your house, a copper tube is what you want. You hear a lot about the houses that were built before, like in the 30s or something. They had lead pipes coming to the house. That's when copper got more used. But the American brass in Kenosha, that was only one plant of Anaconda's plants. They had mines, mills, and smelters. So that was a big corporation.
Okay. Now, what was the workspace like? What was the space in the crane that you had to work with?
Oh, well, it's a crane. You have a seat, and you're at the controls, and you got 2 levers, and each one lowered separate booms. Some cranes had 2 levers with 2 cranes working. But most of it was just one lever down to lower the boom, and each cable would come independently, so you had to move it independently.
Okay. So you became a steward in the union
In 1957.
57 after you came back from the service, and
Yep.
what was
Got active in the union after that.
Okay, what made you decide to get active in the union?
Because I didn't like the way the people were being treated,
Okay.
in my opinion.
Sure. Okay. What was the relationship between the management and the union?
It was okay. I was a younger kid. When I came out of the service, I was like 23 or 24, and I had a tendency to be a little bit less patient with the corp. But they were doing stuff that they shouldn't be doing, and it wasn't major stuff, but it was treating people right. Then sometimes you get a little bit of heated arguments, but otherwise it was civil.
Okay, and you were a steward, and then you rose up in the union?
Yeah, then I ran for the executive board, and then after being on the executive board for a while, and then of course as we rolled along, we had when you negotiated a contract back then, you didn't. It's hard for people in the future, but the raises back then were like a nickel and 3 cents and 4 cents. It wasn't because the wages went. Well, to give you an example, in 1950 I was making $1.39 an hour. Well, $1.39 an hour And what are people making now? 20, 25, what, $30 an hour? You know? But it got you by. I raised 4 kids on it. So.
Okay, and then after the executive board, did you have another office after
Yeah,
that?
then I ran for vice president,
Okay.
and I won that race. And then in 1967 it was a national copper strike, is what it was.
So it wasn't
It
necessarily
wasn't just this
your
plant; it was a
okay.
national, and each plant, actually the whole industry was shut down. I don't know if you don't remember that or not, but that was in '67, and we went out for 9 months. And I ran for vice president, ended up president because the president resigned because I guess he didn't want to handle the stress. Had 1,300 guys on the street, and here I am, this kid of whatever I was. How old I was then. And I got 1,300 guys on the street, and I think, what do I do now, you know? But we got through it.
So what were the issues in this long strike?
Wages,
Just
benefits.
what kind of benefits did you have?
Well, benefits were okay, but it wasn't, wages were the biggest issue. You know, what you get paid and take home. Benefits, you need them when you need them, but wages, you need it every week. So we were out for 9 months. We went out in July of 1967. We went on strike, and then we went back in April of '68.
What actually was the reason that the contractors actually negotiated? What happened that there was an agreement?
Well, we finally came to the point where they put an offer on the table that was acceptable. So you took it, you know. That's the way it was, you know.
Okay. So while you were out on strike and these other 1,300 were out on strike, what was it that you did for 9 months?
Well, you had to get another job, and it so happened that in 1967, the economy was good. So we were having, we're at the union. I had to go to work. I was president of the union, but I still had to feed my family, and there was no strike benefits. You didn't get, sometimes they have strike benefits where they get a little bit. You didn't get anything, so you had to go to work, and we had to keep the picket line going for 9 months. So, but I actually got a job at a place they called Chicago Hardware Foundry down in Illinois. They made castings for restaurants, toilets and stuff like that. And I got a job down there. I worked down there, but then I was president of the union. Sometimes I had to go to meetings, and actually the company came to the union hall and hired people right out of the union hall, and the plant manager was so good that he said that, oh, if you have to go to meetings, let me know, and then I'll give you 3 or 4 days off, but you can still have your job back when you come back. Of course, I didn't get paid for that part. And he actually told me, he said, I know you're going to the contract negotiations again, because this went on for I had to go a lot of times to Washington in negotiations. And he said, but I hope you don't settle, because I never had better people working for me ever in this plant. Because the people at the brass were good, hard-working people, and they did the job. They were, we had a difference of opinion, that's all. He said, I hope you don't settle, is what he told me. In fact, when we finally left, I worked in the shipping room down at the foundry down there, and when we finally left, he lost 50 people because the whole shipping room went back to work at the brass.
So after the strike was settled, how many people came back?
We never got over 800 after that. We had 1,300 when we went out, and I say this, that if you knew the labor movement, of whoever's reading this in the future, I'm going to say, if you knew the labor movement in the 50s and the 60s and 70s, they were strong, okay? we had 1,300 people on the street, and not one person crossed the picket line, not one. But they all got jobs. In fact, at the foundry down in North Chicago, I went on strike down there for 2 days.
So the reason that only 800 of the 1,300 came back to work at the brass was because they had found jobs.
Yeah, no, yeah. Some had found jobs, and they called back. They called back gradually,
Okay.
but they never got over 8 because they started downsizing by combining jobs, and their jobs where 3 or 4 people would work, they'd get it down to 1 or 2 people. So they never got the workforce up, but they still got the product out because I guess they weren't paying us enough. They didn't have to worry about it. But then when they had to pay a little bit more, they had to find ways to save money, which is what they do. I understand that, you know.
Okay. So 800 people are back to work. And what happened at the end of the strike? What was the wage benefit that came out of it?
Well, we got 45 cents an hour over 3 years, which was pretty good. 15 cents a year. When you're getting 2 and 3 cent raises and you got 15 cents a year, some people got a little bit more because of the higher, depending on their job title,
Okay.
The benefits were better,
Okay, so when you came back to work after the strike, what job did you have?
I actually came back and I was still running. I went back into the shipping room, and then I got an electric furnace, a annealing furnace. That's where you anneal the metal. So when metal gets drawn out, it gets harder as it's drawn out to a smaller size. And then it has to be reheated to anneal it. But I ran a annealing furnace after that.
So annealing softens
The
again?
yeah.
So you
Softens
can
the
work
metal
with
for
it
the
again?
next draw, or sometimes it's the final product that has to be annealed, because if you get a coil of copper, 3/4 copper or something, it's hard at the final the final roll, and it has to be softened so the product is usable for like an example of water through your copper tubing into your house. If the coil was hard, you couldn't unwind it and to get it to the house. And then the softer metal, then that will flange better. It will flange easier. I mean, I don't know if it's making any sense, but it had to be soft at the final product. Some of it was shipped in hard. Well, if you have copper in your house, you'll see you have copper tubing. Some of the tubing is hard. That's because it's straight length. You want to go to a different water pipe.
Okay, and how long did you work in the furnace?
I think I worked from 67 to I had run a crane before I got the furnace a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but then I left there at 76. I got off of that and I went back to the crane.
Okay. And then you worked the crane until you retired. Is that right?
Yeah, I was running a crane, and I actually retired because I got a better job.
Okay. Do you know of anything that affected the company's ability to expand or work? In any technology changes?
Yeah, well, the technology changes were the reason that the plant eventually, everyone you know that the plant shut down sometime in the 90s. The problem was that the copper tube wasn't as used as much. You went to PCV, you went to plastics for, like, take a refrigerator line. You got a copper cable going to the refrigerator for water for your ice cubes. Okay, now they turned that to plastic. So automation. Eventually, the plant shut down because they didn't have the bigger demand for the product.
Okay. So, what circumstances led you to leave the company?
I got a better job. I ran for I took a leave of absence. And I had 32 years. And they had a pension that, but I left, I ran for state assembly. And I actually ran against the mayor of Kenosha, city of Kenosha, who was actually John Raymond. I ran against him for state assembly in 1980, and I lost the election. But in the meantime, after that election, because of all my political things and my involvement, I was able to get a job. I got a job offer from a state senator, Maurer, to be his home secretary. So then I ran. So I got a choice: go back to the brass, or be a home secretary for a state senator. So I took the small pension that the brass gave us, and I retired from there, and I went to work for Senator Maurer.
Okay.
And when a state senator, home secretary, do a lot of things, but you do a lot of information and get to the constituents, door-to-door stuff. Passing out not campaign literature, because you can't do that, but informational stuff. Which is all politics, obviously.
Okay. Did the company or the union sponsor any events during the year? I mean, were there?
Oh yeah, we had actually we set up. We got some vending machines in the plant. Okay, we didn't have it before, so the company said, okay, we're going to get these vending machines, and there's going to be a profit. So they shared the profit with the union, for the union people, and then they say they had part of it they had for their non-represented people who were in the office. So we had picnics and stuff with that money. Oh yeah, the company was okay. Yeah, it was, like I said, I got along with the plant manager. I got along with Bill Gerwin was the human service resource guy, very competent guy. And when you're dealing with unions, you help some people, and that's what made me feel good too.
Okay. Did you make any lasting relationships from your time at American Brass? Any lasting relationships with coworkers or anybody?
Oh yeah, but they're all gone now.
But you did.
I'm going to be 90 years old, and for the record, this is 2022, and I started at the brass when I was 18. So you can add that up, and you'll find that I'm 90 years old. I've been around the block a few times.
What was the best part of working at the brass?
I don't know if there was a good part or a bad part. I raised 4 kids on $2.50 an hour, so $3 an hour. Worked a lot of overtime. Worked 2 jobs sometimes. Sometimes they would go to short hours. You'd have to make it go. But I raised 4 kids on it, so I got no regrets. I had a good life, and ain't over yet, Of course, by the time somebody reads this, it will be over. But in the meantime, I'm still around. I got all the original parts. Let me put it that way.
Okay. How did you feel when the company closed?
Well, I was gone by that time, but I felt bad about it because, brass was part of Kenosha. I mean, you had all these small plants, and like White and Laddish and all of those plants, and the unions were a family, and I was president of the Labor Council for 3 or 4 years in the meantime, but when I was with the union. But it felt bad because now it's a empty lot, or there's a school there now. In fact, I go by there sometimes and I say, well, I ran a crane right up there, but it's not there anymore.
Well, thank you for talking to me today.
My pleasure.